Welcome to this short video by the University of the West of Scotland as a part of the EU-funded PEDAL project. This video is on task-based language teaching. Task-based language teaching, or TBLT, can be regarded to be a communicative language teaching approach. Now, we say approach rather than method because any form of communicative language teaching is considered to be a post method. That is to say that unlike earlier ways of teaching languages, for example, grammar translation, communicative language teaching takes a slightly more fluid approach to what goes on in the teacher and student relationship. Thus, there are a core set of theories and beliefs about the nature of language learning, and a derived set of principles for teaching a language in communicative language teaching. But crucially, these are not necessarily underpinned by research evidence. There are, or we can imagine there to be, a sliding scale of communicative language teaching approaches. In strong forms of communicative language teaching, students are encouraged to test hypotheses. This is very similar to contemporary education's concept of a flipped teaching environment or a flipped classroom, where the power is given to the student and the teacher is there to help construct the environment and the context for learning and discovery. In a weaker form of communicative language teaching, the teacher has a slightly more involved role in what goes on in the classroom. For example, the teacher will be more actively involved in scaffolding learning from lesson to lesson in order to help the student progress to a stage where they can have more learner autonomy, where they can have more influence over the way in which they are choosing to learn and to use the target language. Typically, a communicative language teaching approach will follow what we call a PPP, or triple P structure. This means that the teacher will divide up the lesson into 3 parts in which they present new information. Students are encouraged to practice what they have been taught. And then finally, the students will be encouraged to innovatively produce that new language. As I said, task-based language teaching can be regarded to be a communicative language teaching approach. It is usually considered to be a strongish form of communicative language teaching, but it does include active language instruction, so we are not simply assuming that students will pick up on the new language inputs and on grammatical and lexical features of their target language. The teacher's role is then to create real and meaningful languaging opportunities for their students, and we can think about this as being divided into 2 broad categories. Input, providing students with input in which the students observe and hypothesize about the way in which language is being used. And pushed output opportunities, where the teacher helps to encourage those students to experiment with language and to evaluate their own language production. There's no one approach to delivering a lesson in a task-based language teaching context, but many teachers find the following to be very useful in designing their lesson activities. So they would provide a pre-task opportunity for their students in which they, the teacher, introduce the students to the topic and to the tasks that they would like their students to complete. Then there is a task cycle. This is really one of the core components of that lesson, in which the students complete the task, but then they also plan how to report on what they've done to complete that task. And eventually, as a part of that task cycle, they do actively report on what they have done to the rest of the class. And then finally, as a sort of plenary to the lesson, the teacher will focus on the language that has been used in that lesson. They'll encourage their students to analyze language production and to practice particular forms of the language that have been targeted in that, or if they haven't been targeted, that have arisen in that lesson. When creating a task-based language teaching lesson, tasks are obviously at the center of what the teacher is planning. In designing these tasks, we have to emphasize the importance of pragmatics as opposed to grammatical or lexical purity or nativeness. That is to say, that what we were doing when we're designing these tasks is to create an intentional gap between what the student is capable of doing and what they know, and what we would like them to develop through the process of achieving this task. So there are different sorts of gaps that might be incorporated into a task-based language teaching approach. There could be an information gap or a reasoning gap or an opinion gap. So these would all be opportunities for the student to move from point A to point B through a task. For example, gathering information about their classmates that they did not already know, reasoning, engaging with new arguments that perhaps they haven't encountered previously, not necessarily anything that is fixated on the target language itself. It could be a broader cultural issue, or simply expressing their opinions. And again, not necessarily opinions directly related to the target language. Opinions in general can be an opportunity to try and get people to use the language in a communicative way, and in a way that, again, feels real, feels meaningful to them. The tasks should be student-led. We're always aiming in task-based language teaching to build that learner autonomy, to encourage learners to use the language where they're capable of doing it. And the linguistic outcome is therefore secondary to the task outcome. So when you're running a task-based language teaching activity, as a teacher, typically you do not interrupt your students to tell them, oh, you've misused this verb, or you forgot to make this noun plural. You allow the students to use the language as much as they are capable of doing, so long as they're able to communicate with one another. That is the key thing. And that brings me to the end of this very short presentation on task-based language teaching. Again, this was produced as a part of the University of the West of Scotland's contribution to the EU-funded PETAL project. You can find more details about this project by Googling PETAL project and clicking through to the link. Thank you.